The first time I realized I was invisible was when Bryce cracked a joke about me mid-meeting while popping the cork off a bottle of Veuve. "Rachel's so diligent she probably files a TPS report for her lunch breaks," he said, and the room erupted like he was hosting open mic night at a country club. I was 3 feet away, holding the report that showed a $2.3 million discrepancy in vendor billing. No one even looked up. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of me squinting at contracts printed in 8-point font on cheap recycled paper, tracking down partners with more P.O. boxes than employees, and chasing ghosts through shell companies with names like Titan Core East Limited. An Aegis soft essay, which, if you're curious, is based out of a shipping container in Gibraltar, according to Google Maps. I emailed legal. I flagged procurement. I even pinged Bryce's EA once, who replied with a gif of a minion falling over. That was the entire response to a flagged vendor tied to 3 suspicious wire transfers. Now, I know how this sounds. Why didn't you escalate? Oh, honey, I did. You ever try telling a tech bro who thinks he's the second coming of Jobs that his golden goose has mold? Bryce was a walking TD quote with a Rolex tan and a God complex. He'd pat me on the shoulder after I warned him about offshore data compliance and say things like, "Rachel, if we played it safe, we'd still be in a garage." Then he'd climb into a company-paid Tesla and disappear for 3-day weekends in Napa with the strategic partners who couldn't spell GDPR if you spotted them the first 3 letters. It was like standing in a burning house while everyone else roasted marshmallows and called it innovation. By year 2, I had stopped expecting responses. But I hadn't stopped filing. I made copies. Quietly, I bought my own scanner off Craigslist, started a secure folder in my personal cloud. Every time they laughed, I uploaded. Every time someone told me not to worry, I timestamped. Because one thing I've learned about men like Bryce, they only respect fire when it burns them. Now, before I go deeper, can I ask you one small favor? If you're still listening and haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. It really does help the team keep making these stories. And if you give it a like too, I promise we'll keep roasting these corporate clowns with receipts hotter than Bryce's offshore tax strategy. Anyway, what triggered this specific spiral of dumpster fire was a contract I flagged in May. It came through procurement, buried under 3 layers of partner discounts and vague wording about offshore processing capabilities. That's corporate lingo for "we don't want to tell you where your data is going." Vendor was listed as Clear Byte Systems Limited, a name that didn't show up in any past logs, had no known tax ID, and their listed office in Singapore was a co-working space that doubled as a bubble tea cafe. I brought it up in the next compliance sync. Nobody said a word. You ever sit in a meeting where everyone suddenly forgets how to make eye contact? That's when I knew this wasn't ignorance, it was permission. Someone up top wanted these things to slide through. And it wasn't just Bryce. It was the entire leadership table, too hopped up on Series C funding to care where the bodies were buried, as long as the valuation kept going up. A week later, I found something worse. The vendor name appeared again, only this time as Clear Byte International. Same invoice template, same formatting, different tax number. That's not just lazy fraud, it's arrogant fraud. It screamed, "We dare you to notice," so I did. I stayed late one night and pulled 6 months of vendor data into Excel. It was like playing Minesweeper with financial crime. One click here, a pivot table there, and boom. Patterns emerged. Clearbyte had billed us under 4 different shell names, 2 of which had offshore bank accounts routed through Panama. None of the contracts listed an actual employee, just authorized representatives. No LinkedIn pages, no bios, no paper trails. And the final cherry on the sundae of corruption? One of the IPs tied to a data node in their infrastructure pointed to a server hosted in a location that wasn't on any of our asset maps. A server that, according to one junior engineer who didn't realize I was within earshot, was just for the execs. That's not how any of this is supposed to work. If compliance doesn't know about a system, it shouldn't exist. Period. I sent one more email, this time to Bryce directly. Subject line, "Unregistered server location, immediate review requested." I attached the logs, outlined the risk, and flagged the vendor for potential FCPA implications. That's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, for those blissfully unaware of how international bribery laws work. I even bolded the part that said, "Non-disclosure of data servers to compliance constitutes a federal-level violation under corporate transparency guidelines." 3 days passed, no reply. On the 4th day, he stood up in an all-hands meeting, popped another bottle of champagne, and called me diligent to a fault. Laughed, winked at me like we were in on the joke together. I stood there, holding the printout of a server that, spoiler alert, wouldn't stay hidden for much longer. Because while he was busy toasting his own ego, I had already started making calls. Thing about corruption in a startup is it doesn't show up wearing a ski mask. It wears all birds and performance fleece and smiles while it siphons money through global growth initiatives. I wasn't looking for a scandal. I was just trying to do my job without getting a nosebleed from how high the bulls stacked up every time Bryce opened his mouth. But the deeper I looked, the more the pattern stopped whispering and started screaming. It started with the invoices. Not one, not two, 12 of them. Different vendor names, but the same font, the same grammatical errors. Who the hell spells technology with 3 E's? And the same lazy copy-paste phrasing. Cloud optimization consulting. Nobody in our office could even explain what that meant. One line item billed us $128,000 for latency innovation. I asked the dev team if they knew what that was. They laughed and said it sounded like a deodorant for your Wi-Fi. But the money kept moving. Every month. Same amounts, just shuffled across slightly different names. Clear Byte Global, CB Systems Group, Byte Soft Holdings. You know, totally normal for a startup with one product and a user base smaller than a Midwest dentist's mailing list. I started digging into vendor onboarding logs. That's when things went from fishy to flaming dumpster fire. The same EIN was used for 2 different vendors. The contact name rotated between Kyle D., Derek Kyle, and my personal favorite, KD. Solutions. Someone didn't even try. It was like fraud written by a bored intern. Then came the slip-up. It was late September, and I was in the break room pretending to enjoy decaf because Bryce thought caffeine lowered spiritual alignment. A junior engineer, Nick, sweet kid, too green to know when to shut up, mentioned he had to push a patch to the ghost box. I paused. Ghost box? He turned pale. Oh, I mean the staging server, the legacy one. Where's that hosted? He stammered something about internal-only access and non-standard region tagging, then practically moonwalked out of the room. I didn't press. Didn't need to, because I had already seen a line in the logs that tied one of those vendor payments to a data center in Romania. And we didn't operate anything in Romania. By that point, I'd given up on our internal systems. IT access was being streamlined, which was just a euphemism for you're not allowed to see things anymore. Legal had gone full mime act whenever I emailed. I once sent them a flagged contract and got back a bitmoji of someone shrugging, so I started my own archive, not on company drives, not on Google Docs. I used a flash drive from my old college days, label peeled off. Looks like it's storing SpongeBob episodes, which in a way it kind of was. SpongeBob meets the firm. I created folders for each shell name. I tracked dates, amounts, currency fluctuations, even time zone anomalies. One invoice had a timestamp 5 hours ahead of our office time, even though the vendor supposedly operated in Chicago. Another one billed us for a service completed on a Sunday at 3 a.m. Eastern. While the contract stated Monday through Friday, U.S. business hours only. This wasn't sloppiness. This was a pattern, a design pattern, masked by just enough chaos to make anyone without patience give up. But I've been in compliance for 11 years. I don't give up. I lean in. And all the while, Bryce was walking around like he was starring in a biopic about himself. Every time funding came through, he'd host some bacchanal in the office. One time, he rented a bubble machine. Another time, a live goat. It's symbolic, he said. Greatest of all time. Get it? He fed it grapes while the team tried to smile through the smell of barnyard symbolism. I'd sit in the back during these parties, sipping club soda and thinking about those fake vendors. How the money moved, who signed off, how nobody was even pretending to care. Once, during one of these champagne-soaked celebrations, I found a moment to slide up next to our CFO, Diane. I liked Diane, she was sharp, wore heels that could kill a man and kept her inbox at 0. Ever wonder why we have 4 vendors with the same invoice template? I asked casually. She raised an eyebrow but didn't blink. Bryce says they're just subsidiaries, all with the same bank routing number. That got a pause. You sure? I nodded, triple-checked. She gave a half smile. Kind women give when they know something's rotten but can't afford to say it. Put it in a memo, she said, but leave me out of it, so I did. Added it to the folder. Labeled it silent confirmations. Because silence in these places isn't neutrality, it's strategy. From that point on, I stopped waiting for backup. This was my war now, not the kind with grenades and flags. The kind fought with timestamps and contracts, with metadata, with calm, seething patience. Because I knew that one day, the pattern would slip. And when it did, I'd be ready. The pushback came on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate. Tuesdays are like the armpit of the week. Bryce's assistant pinged me with one of those syrupy calendar invites labeled Quick Sync, which we all knew was corporate code for enter the lion's den without a helmet. His office smelled like citrus and ego, that sickening mix of overpriced cologne and fake optimism, like someone bottled gaslighting and slapped a premium label on it. He didn't even bother to stand when I walked in, just swiveled his leather chair like a Bond villain and gestured to the couch across from him. I didn't sit. Rachel, he began, drawing my name out like he was tasting it for bitterness. You've been busy? I nodded. That's the job. He smiled. Too white, too polished. See, that's the thing. We're building rockets here, not red tape. And lately, it feels like your department is more focused on playing detective than enabling growth. I tilted my head. Isn't it your job to grow the company and mine to keep it legal? His smile didn't break, but the air shifted. Rachel, I need you to tone it down. You're spooking partners. There's a fine line between vigilance and paranoia. Ah, there it was. The classic compliance takedown, reframe accuracy as hysteria. I didn't say much after that, just listened. Noticed. Way he kept his screen angled away from me. The way he dropped phrases like cross-functional synergy, and not everything needs your fingerprints. I counted the seconds between sentences to keep from saying what I wanted to, which was something along the lines of, I've seen rats cover their tracks with more finesse than you. He wrapped it with a saccharine, we're all on the same team here, and sent me on my way with a casual dismissal that felt like a brush off from a bouncer. The fallout came quickly. That Friday, I got an email from finance. My quarterly compliance software budget had been reevaluated and was now less than what Bryce spent on office succulents. No warning, no explanation, just poof, funds gone. The same day, I got a system access notification that half my privileges had been temporarily restructured as part of a company-wide data hygiene initiative, which just so happened to only affect me. And then came HR. A chirpy blonde named Madison called me into a room with fake ferns and worse lighting to let me know they were doing a routine spot check of employee time logs, specifically my logs. Apparently, someone flagged anomalies. When I asked what anomalies, she shrugged with the helplessness of someone paid not to know. Just cross-referencing login times and lunch breaks, she chirped. We're sure it's nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was a warning shot. They were circling the wagons, making me the problem. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the one flagging potential fraud. I was the unstable compliance officer who needed boundaries and maybe a little PTO. A walking liability with too many questions and not enough team spirit. So I did what women like me have always done when the room tilts unfairly. I adapted. I stopped sending emails, stopped flagging things in Slack, stopped handing over perfectly gift-wrapped warnings they didn't want to open. Instead, I went quiet. But behind that silence, I started building a wall. Every deleted email, I archived a copy. Every updated contract, I downloaded the original. Every time someone tried to gaslight me into thinking I was imagining the patterns, I documented the manipulation, dated, and timestamped. I started recording verbal instructions, not illegally, just detailed meeting notes with quotes and quotation marks. I printed things and mailed them to myself, sealed and postmarked, so I'd have a legal trail if things went nuclear. I even set up a secure cloud backup routed through a VPN that would auto-send to a contact outside the company if I ever lost access. Paranoid? Maybe, but I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for a trial. The real turning point came 3 weeks later when I stumbled on a buried contract. Unsigned, but templated, naming Clearbyte Global as a data intermediary in a pipeline that involved client information. That's not just sketchy. That's a federal violation waiting to happen, but I didn't escalate it. I didn't send a warning. I printed it, tucked it into a red file folder, and slid it into my backpack next to a protein bar and a half-dead lipstick, because I had stopped trying to save them. The company, the founders, the fools in legal who thought plausible deniability was a defense instead of an admission. I stopped trying to be a hero, and I started collecting exhibits. The conference was in Phoenix, which meant 3 days of sweating through blazers in over-air-conditioned hotel ballrooms while corporate panels tried to make compliance sound sexy. Spoiler, it never is. The breakfast buffet was stale. The coffee tasted like scorched regret, and the opening keynote featured a man in khakis trying to sell AI ethics like it was a timeshare. I was halfway through pretending to take notes on a panel about transformational oversight modeling when I met him. He didn't wear a name tag, just stood in the back of the room like someone more interested in the exits than the slides. Later, at one of those awkward sponsor mixers where everyone clutches a branded wine glass and talks about governance like it's foreplay, he struck up a conversation with me over near-stale crackers and a tub of hummus labeled locally sourced. We talked vaguely at first, compliance frameworks, regulatory gaps, vendor vetting failures. I kept it surface level. Habit, protection, survival instinct. But then I mentioned something, offhand, careful, about repetitive shell vendors operating under duplicate tax entities. His eyes didn't widen. His eyebrows didn't twitch. But something shifted behind them, subtle and sharp. Seen it before, he said, voice low. Even I raised an eyebrow. Where? He just sipped his water, nodded toward a nearby potted plant like he was complimenting the ficus, and said, Cross-Agency Integrity Task Force. We track structural fraud patterns. Vendor laundering, offshore obfuscation. Systems built for evasion. Then he slipped a business card into my hand. No name, just a symbol, a secure number, and one line on the back, when ready, confirm only what you can prove. He didn't say goodbye, just melted back into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. I stared at that card every night for weeks. Kept it tucked into a sock drawer behind an old passport and a broken watch I never got around to fixing. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my one friend still hanging on at the company. I didn't even Google the number, I knew better. 'Cause once you make that call, you're no longer the canary in the coal mine. You're the fuse. I almost threw it out 6 times. Each time I'd pick it up, stare at it, feel the weight of it in my hand like a grenade with no pin. I wasn't scared of the fallout. I was scared of being right. That everything I'd seen, every whisper, every shadow, wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate. Then one night, I logged into the system for a routine archive scrape. Just habit. I knew they were deleting files, had been for months. Every week, a few invoices disappeared. A few vendor records cleaned up, whitewashed, but this night was different, because one of the invoices I'd archived, one that had definitely been deleted 2 weeks earlier, was back. Different name, different vendor code, same exact formatting, same timestamp on the internal server, same dollar amount down to the cent. It was like someone had tried to launder the evidence twice, scrubbed it, waited for the dust to settle, then reinserted it under a fresh alias. The kind of thing you don't do unless you're sure the watchdogs aren't watching. But I was. I sat there, frozen in my chair, staring at that invoice like it had sprouted horns. I knew every corner of our procurement system, knew how metadata works, and I could see it plain as day. They didn't just mess up. They were testing the system, seeing what they could get away with, and they'd bet everything that no one was watching. So I stood up, walked to my closet, pulled out the card, and dialed. It rang once, twice. Then a click, no greeting, no name. I said one sentence. I found a pattern. Multiple vendors, overlapping tax IDs, falsified timestamps, and an unregistered data node offshore. Silence on the line. Then, can you prove it? Yes. Have you told anyone? No. Are you compromised? Not yet. He gave me a new number, a method, a protocol, no email, no attachments, just voice and paper. Old school, secure. Send nothing yet, he said. Just hold, confirm, observe. Then we move. I hung up. Then I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the distant buzz of a city too busy to care about truth. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt dangerous. I spent the next 2 months in silence, the kind that hums in your bones. No more memos, no more friendly nudges to legal. I wore a polite smile in meetings and clapped when Bryce announced his next big brainchild, a transformational global partnership with a company called Stratacore Nexus International. The name alone sounded like a Bond villain with a LinkedIn profile, and sure enough, their entire online presence consisted of a single-page site with a copyright date from 2019 and stock photos of people shaking hands across digital globes. He showed off a slide deck during the internal launch, said it was going to revolutionize offshore data flexibility. The word compliance didn't appear once in the 37-slide PDF, but I recognized the vendor address buried in the footer. It was the same address tied to one of the 4 shell companies I'd flagged a year earlier, Clearbyte Holdings. Same floor number, same bogus suite, new logo, new lie. Bryce had finally stopped pretending, so I did too. That weekend, I cleared off my dining table, shut my blinds, and laid everything out. The receipts, the contracts, the doctored invoices with their cloned language and shifted decimal points. I printed Slack logs where I was told not to worry about jurisdiction. I included photos of whiteboard scribbles I'd snapped during late meetings where Bryce diagrammed revenue pathways that looked more like money laundering spiderwebs. I built a timeline, color-coded and annotated like I was prepping for court, because in a way, I was. Some of the documents had been scrubbed from our systems, so I used my backups. Some were half-deleted PDFs with metadata fingerprints that still linked them to Bryce's EA's machine. Every page I included told a story of arrogance, of fraud disguised as strategy, of men who thought transparency was just a checkbox to click after the IPO. The chats were the worst, or the best, depending on how you look at it. One engineer directly asking if the ghost box has encryption or do we just pray. Another wondering aloud if the vendor even exists because their ticket responses were just auto-replies in broken English. And Bryce himself in a private thread, laughing about how these compliance leeches don't get the vision. I added that screenshot last. Then I wrote a cover sheet. No name, no signature. Just a sentence, this system is designed to fail upward. Please stop it before it takes people down with it. I printed the whole thing, bound it, wrapped it in plain brown paper. Then I walked it in the middle of a Tuesday to a secure mailbox tied to the number I was given. No GPS, no email, no trace. I watched it disappear through the slot, and I felt nothing, not relief, not fear, not triumph, just stillness. Bryce threw another party that Friday. Someone wheeled in a custom cake shaped like a rocket ship. To the moon, it said in piped blue frosting. I stood in the back again, sipping my soda, listening to people clap for something they didn't understand. I looked at him, standing on that makeshift stage, drunk on attention and unchecked power, and I realized something terrifying and true. He wasn't hiding anymore because he didn't think he had to. He believed he'd outgrown consequences, that he'd become too big to catch, that if he built his tower high enough, the rules couldn't reach him. But they could, and now they would, because the folder was out of my hands, and the fuse was already lit. The first call came on a Sunday night, just one ring, no voicemail, blocked number. I was folding laundry, half watching a baking show where someone dropped a soufflé and cried. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another spammer or maybe a recruiter trying to convince me to jump ship for another tech startup with kombucha on tap and no moral compass. But then it happened again. Tuesday, Thursday, always blocked. Never more than a ring or two, like someone checking if I was still there. Alive, listening, watching. Then they stopped. And the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was pressure, like the air thickening before a storm. I could feel it in the way our usually oblivious COO avoided the elevators and started taking the stairs. In how legal stopped posting their passive-aggressive Slack updates about Q3 policy compliance, as if the mere concept of rules had suddenly become radioactive. People whispered more in the halls. Eyes darted quicker. Someone from finance left a meeting and threw up in the bathroom. I knew because the intern cleaning up after him told me with the kind of horrified reverence reserved for war stories and startup culture. And then came the calendar invite. All hands, quarterly business update required attendance Thursday, 10 o'clock a.m., Founders Hall. Presenters, Bryce/legal/R, Nolan Compliance. I stared at it for a full minute before it sank in, my name in the presenter slot. No one had told me, no one had asked, it wasn't a request, it was a chess move. I didn't reply, just clicked yes. That night I ironed my navy blazer, the one I kept at the back of the closet for funerals and bad dates. It had a subtle rip on the inside lining I'd stitched back up years ago, right after my first boss told me I was too intense to be client-facing. I checked the seams, still strong. I didn't print slides, didn't bring my laptop, just one pen, cheap, blue, reliable. The morning of the meeting, the office was too quiet. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see who'd be the first to blink. Bryce strutted around in a white button-down so crisp it could have sliced drywall. His assistant flitted behind him, arms full of folders no one would read. I walked past legal's floor. 4 doors were shut. One light was flickering. Someone was crying into their scarf. I didn't stop. Back at my desk, I opened my email and stared at my sent folder. The folder was gone, sent, delivered. Months of work out in the world now, ticking like a clock buried under the floorboards. And from the way people were acting, I wasn't the only one hearing it. At 9:52, new message appeared in Slack from Bryce. Excited for a productive update today? Let's show the team how far we've come. Translation: smile for the cameras while the floor opens beneath you. I made my way to the all hands 10 minutes early. The main conference hall had been staged like a pep rally, company-branded banners. A looping slideshow of stock photos showing happy coders high-fiving next to slogans like "Scale, with integrity and trust" is a feature. I took my seat in the second row. Not front row, not hiding either. Across the room, legal looked like they were trying to sit inside their own suits. Diane from finance was tapping her pen so hard it left a dent in her notebook. And Bryce, he was smiling like this was the Oscars and he was up for Best Delusion in a leading role. He caught my eye, gave a little nod. Like we shared a secret. We did, just not the one he thought. Bryce took the mic like a man expecting applause before he even said a word. He started with his usual swagger, thanking the rock stars in engineering, hyping up the visionaries in product, and throwing out buzzwords like a drunk auctioneer: synergy, agility, verticals, disruption. Each word slicker than the last, slipping off his tongue like they were coated in venture capital and snake oil. Then he pivoted. You know, he said, leaning casually on the podium like he was about to deliver a TED talk to a room full of frat brothers. I've been hearing a lot of chatter about compliance lately. Policies, audits, forms. I swear if I have to fill out one more vendor attestation checklist, I might just lose it. A few people chuckled, nervous, glancing around to see if it was safe to laugh. Bryce grinned. Don't get me wrong, we love compliance. Keeps us out of jail, right? More laughter. But let's be honest, when we move fast, sometimes the paper pushers get nervous. That's okay, that's their job. He looked right at me. She's the best paper pusher I know, he said, and the grin that followed was pure venom wrapped in charm. I didn't blink, didn't smile, just let the silence hang for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then he gestured toward legal, who gave a 5-minute nothing burger about ongoing diligence and process alignment. It was the corporate version of tossing glitter into a fan, useless, pretty, and impossible to clean up afterward. Finally, Bryce turned back to the mic. And now a few words from Rachel Nolan, our fearless compliance lead, here to remind us all why we can't have nice things. The audience gave a scattered, unsure laugh. A few of my peers looked down at their shoes. I stood, walked to the front. No slides, no notes, just me and the pen in my hand. I opened my mouth. But before I could speak, Bryce cut in again, voice louder than necessary. Sweetheart, stick to the paperwork. Let the men handle business. The room went still. Then laughter, not everyone, not loudly, but enough to echo, enough to sting. The kind of laughter that isn't about humor. It's about survival. About aligning with the power in the room so you don't become its next target. I felt the heat rise in my neck, flush of humiliation creeping up behind my ears like a slow burn. My fingers twitched around the pen. I thought about 1,000 things I could say about federal statutes, whistleblower protections, clawback clauses, and the chain of custody that now sat in a sealed envelope in a government office with a case file that had my initials on it. But I didn't say any of them. Instead, I smiled, not wide, not warm, just enough to show teeth. Then I glanced at my watch. 10:41 a.m., 19 minutes. That's how long they had left before the world changed. I stepped back from the mic, sat down without a word. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded. Bryce looked confused for half a second, like he wasn't sure if this was a bit or a glitch in his script. He leaned over and whispered something to his assistant, who nodded too fast and typed something on her iPad. The room shifted. I could feel it. A pressure building, like a sky about to split open. I crossed my legs, tapped my pen against the side of my chair, and waited. Because humiliation is temporary. But consequences? Consequences come dressed in Navy suits and federal credentials, and they were on their way. At exactly 11:38 a.m., the glass doors to the main lobby hissed open with the quiet finality of a sealed vault cracking under pressure. Two men stepped inside. No sunglasses, no dramatic trench coats, just navy blue jackets, federal badges clipped neatly to their belts, and the kind of posture that doesn't come from yoga, it comes from watching people lie for a living. The receptionist, new girl, barely 2 weeks in, froze mid-phone call and stared like someone had just summoned ghosts from the HVAC ducts. The taller agent leaned in, said something low, showed her a piece of paper, then gestured to the security camera above the desk like he was checking to make sure the record light was on. I was in the conference hall still, second row, pen still in hand, and then my phone buzzed. One notification, Rachel Nolan, please report to reception visitors for you. No context, no RSVP. I stood up, walked out. Behind me, people murmured. Bryce was mid-sentence, something about hypergrowth initiatives and AI-led compliance forecasting, which is a fancy way of saying we hope the algorithm forgives our sins faster than auditors find them. I walked down the hallway without hurrying. My heels echoed like a slow drumbeat. I passed the break room. Someone dropped their coffee. As I turned the corner to the lobby, the taller agent spotted me and smiled, not friendly, not cold, just precise. Rachel Nolan? Yes. He handed me a manila envelope, sealed with a printed header. Joint Task Force Regulatory Integrity Review confirmation of source underneath, a line of text. Please confirm document receipt and information accuracy with signature below. I read it, carefully, no rush, then signed. The shorter agent glanced down at his tablet. We'll need a secure room, isolated terminal access, and audit logs for the following data node. He spoke the name aloud, and that's when the building cracked, not physically, emotionally, spiritually, because the name he said, it wasn't a department, it wasn't a vendor, it wasn't even supposed to exist. It was the offshore server, the one Bryce had mocked, the one I'd flagged, the one that lived in hushed hallway whispers and undocumented pipeline maps buried under layers of shell companies and plausible deniability. I looked over my shoulder. The hallway had filled like a slow flood. Legal counsel stood near the door, pale as printer paper. Anne from finance clutched her phone like it might save her. A couple of interns hovered behind a ficus, eyes wide, recording nothing but storing everything. And Bryce walked toward us with a smile that twitched at the edges like it was barely hanging on. Officers, he said, tone sunny, what seems to be the issue? The taller agent didn't answer him, just turned to me. You've worked here how long? 5 years, I replied. Good, he said. You'll know where the bones are buried. Bryce laughed, too loud, too brittle. This is all just a misunderstanding, I'm sure. We've got nothing to hide. Wonderful, the agent replied. Then you won't mind escorting us to a terminal where we can verify the server logs and payment trails for Stratacore Nexus, Clear Byte Global, and Byte Soft Holdings. The blood drained from Bryce's face like a curtain dropping at intermission. One moment, smug sun god. The next, ghost in a Hugo Boss suit. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looked around like the air had betrayed him. I didn't speak, didn't need to because the walls were doing it for me now. The walls remembered every file I'd uploaded, every timestamp I'd logged, every receipt they tried to erase. And the system, the one Bryce claimed was too bloated to care, it had finally turned its head. As we walked toward the elevators, the agents beside me, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked calm. Because I was. The agents led us straight into the main operations conference room, the one with the smart glass walls, and the massive TV no one ever figured out how to turn off motion smoothing on. The silence hit like a power outage. You could feel the air shift as each executive filed in, legal counsel, the CFO, two board liaisons who suddenly looked very small without their quarterly projections to hide behind. I sat quietly near the end of the table, pen in hand, still no laptop, didn't need one. Bryce tried to keep the performance going. He smiled, made a joke about hoping the feds brought donuts, and even pulled out a chair like he was hosting a corporate brunch. But the moment the taller agent laid down the printed list of flagged project names, everything cracked. He said the words clean and deliberate, like a surgeon naming bones before the cut. Operation Valence, Node, Blue Star, Stratacore Nexus, Clear Byte Holdings, Byte Soft International, Romanian Endpoint Undeclared Data Transfer Pipeline. The CTO, a man who once told me that compliance should be seen, not heard, shifted in his seat like someone had swapped his cushion with a cactus. He cleared his throat and whispered, barely audible, she told us. Years ago, no one replied, they didn't need to. Bryce, still standing, looked like a man who'd walked onto stage expecting applause and realized the script had changed to his own eulogy. He opened his mouth to speak, but the shorter agent cut in, polite but firm. We'll need access credentials for the admin terminal and a private room. Mr. Halberd, we'd ask that you remain on site for the duration of the inquiry. Bryce blinked. Sorry, what? You're not being detained, the agent said, calm as a scalpel. But we'd like your cooperation. Leaving the premises at this stage would trigger escalation protocols. Bryce looked around the room, but no one met his eyes. Not legal, not the CFO, not the CTO, definitely not me. For a man who had built his empire on momentum and charm, the lack of noise was a death sentence. The silence that followed was vast, weighty, the kind of silence that swallows ambition and spins it into regret. I didn't say a word, just watched. I could have gloated, could have smirked, could have said I warned you, could have said you called me sweetheart, but none of that mattered now. It was all happening, and the system, his system, was now doing what I had spent 5 years begging it to do. Listen, my hands rested on the table, steady. My chest felt lighter than it had in years, not because the war was over, but because finally someone else had picked up a sword. By the end of the day, Bryce's badge had been deactivated, his name scrubbed from internal systems, his office locked from the inside, and I went back to my desk and exhaled. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.